When the unexpected happens, count on Canada Life's flexible life and health insurance to help your business keep working, even when you can't. Don't let life's challenges stand in the way of your success. Protect what you've built today. Visit CanadaLife.com/business protection to learn more. Canada Life. Insurance, investments, advice.
Black Friday is here at IKEA, and the clock is ticking on savings that you won't want to miss. Join IKEA family for free today and unlock deals on everything from holiday must-haves to cozy at-home essentials. All the little and big things you need to make this season shine. But don't wait. Like leftovers at midnight, our Black Friday offers won't last. Shop now at ikea.ca/Black Friday. IKEA. Bring home to life.
Millions of people around the world agree that day doesn't begin until after their cup of coffee.
We all know that too much coffee gives us the jitters or has us staring at the ceiling until the wee hours, but that's the trade-off we make for its euphoric jolt to our nervous system. We're not giving up our Java, our mud, our wakey juice. If you want it, well, you'll have to pry our hands from our cold brew.
Well, drink up because your morning coffee may be disappearing.
There's a growing body of scientific research that is demonstrating that coffee plants and many producing regions are under threat of crop reduction due in part to fluctuating temperature, also in part due to water scarcity.
Before you panic about a dreaded switch to tea, scientists are searching for alternatives to traditional coffee plants that are less resource intensive and even beneficial for the environment.
Not only might we save coffee, but it might save us. Hear how it could literally build a sustainable future. I'm Seth Shostak, and this is Big Picture Science from the SETI Institute.
I'm Molly Bentley. This episode presents the coffee of the future.
Let's begin by looking at the important role coffee plays in our lives.
Everyone has their own way of preparing coffee, and everyone thinks that they know the best way to prepare it. Even amongst our small team, Shannon, Brian, and my husband Gordy and me, we all have a different routine.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You and I have slightly different ways of making coffee.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so let's commence.
So my preferred way to drink coffee is cold brew. I like having an iced cold brew, usually with oat milk.
I make cold brew. I have a gigantic supply of beans that I keep on top of the fridge in my apartment because they get in the way of everything else.
So maybe rip this bag open, give it a smell. Oh, that smells so good.
Okay, well, he's grinding the coffee. I need to get out my milk because I use two kinds.
Now I'm pulling the piece of paper I keep on the top of the fridge to put on the counter to load the coffee maker over so that I can capture any grinds that escape.
Unlike most people, I make my coffee at night because it needs to steep for anywhere between 8 to 12 hours.
Now you can see I'm pouring the ground coffee into the basket and I'm pressing it down, but just to the right amount of tension.
Oh man, I didn't put the filter on here. It just dumped all over the counter. Well, that's unfortunate.
So what I do is, in a bowl, I measure out 284 approximately grams of beans.
Milk into the microwave for 32 seconds. Well, it's a little more milk than usual, so let's say 34 seconds.
And I am filling up like a science class liter beaker, and I fill it up with like 1.3, 1.4 liters.
The idea is like when you pour your cold water over, it kind of sprinkles down like rainfall. Oh, it spilled. So now I've got water and coffee grounds all over my table.
Now sweeping the grounds back into the bucket that fell through because they didn't have the filter on.
Now I've taken my coffee off of the stove and
Wait, mine's boiling.
don't let it boil.
Thanks.
And then I just flip a little switch and it drains into that same beaker that I filled it up with, and I've got my cup of coffee for both the morning and for a good portion of the week as well.
To the eye, it looks as though you've made a cappuccino latte.
Yeah, but it's kind of a shortish cappuccino. Yeah.
Clink. Good one.
Well, many of us don't stop at a single cup of coffee. The average individual drinks 3 cups a day.
So it's no surprise that coffee is a pillar of many economies, including those of Colombia, Ethiopia, and Indonesia. Even in the U.S., the industry makes up about 1.5% of the GDP. But climate change is threatening global coffee production, including that of the Arabica bean, used to make most of our brews.
We should expect to see those crops reduce by about 75% in 50 years. And that was one of the conservative estimates. So things are looking pretty dire for the continued access to Arabica coffee on Earth.
We'll hear later about saving wild coffee species at risk of extinction.
But first, among those coming to the rescue of our beloved cup of joe are scientists.
My name is Christopher Hendon. I'm an associate professor of chemistry at the University of Oregon. My research group studies computational materials chemistry and also coffee.
By understanding the chemical composition of coffee, including the molecules of caffeine and those that create taste and aroma, we have a chance to make coffee extraction more efficient while not sacrificing the reason for getting out of bed in the morning, taste.
The cup of coffee I'm drinking today is a washed Ethiopian coffee roasted in Göteborg, Sweden. This coffee today is tasting like lemon peel bergamot, a little bit of saltiness, pretty clean cup, finishes with basically no bitterness. Some of us are thinking about different ways to make the process more sustainable, to think about ways to access more of those flavors that we're inadvertently leaving behind. And without effort today, we're going to run out of it tomorrow. And so that's really what we're working on, and many others around the country.
Chris Hendon, nicknamed Dr. Coffee, knows what's at stake as he helps us think outside the bean. Billions of daily cherished caffeine infusions.
Chris, preparing coffee can be a ritual. It's I don't know if it deserves the term ritual. That makes it sound as if it has some sort of theological importance. But, is that actually important, except from the standpoint of, solidifying family ties or something like that?
Yeah, this goes to why people enjoy or why we're addicted to coffee. And I think that a lot of the reason that people enjoy coffee, or any drink for that matter, is that you get to share it with people, or for us that like to have it by ourselves, it's a moment of peace where it's just you thinking about the world or whatever it is that you're thinking about. The human mind is a very powerful thing, much more powerful than the cup of coffee you're drinking. And if you can find a way to tap into the happiness or the peace, or just to get yourself ready to go do something, if that coffee's the vehicle for that, then I think that's really what people are embracing. I think it's less so about the caffeine molecule floating around, and more so about the ritual, if you want to call it, the process. And actually, I'll just also point out that this idea of a ritual has been around in coffee for a very long time. In fact, it's still practiced today in households in Ethiopia, where the coffee is roasted on a pan in the house. It is then served in a sort of a ceremonious coffee serving. And I myself have an Ethiopian postdoc in my group, and I love to go over to his house and share the process of having the Ethiopian prepared coffee for me in the traditional way. And albeit I'm not in Ethiopia, not in the exact environment, but I'll tell you, it's pretty close to as good as it's going to get in terms of the experience.
What are other foodstuffs that contain caffeine? Are there any that are in common use?
Oh, there's tons. There was a paper published in Science magazine in 2014 that talked about the emergence of coffee and how the plants produce it, and to understand how, in this case, Robusta, the other the other species of coffee that people sometimes engage with, produces caffeine. You have to go back and look at its sort of biosimilarities to other plants. Other plants that produce it are tomatoes, bladderwort, other things. We don't really eat bladderwort, but you get the idea that it shows up in a lot of different plants. We don't really see very high levels in tomatoes, and I think they actually don't contain, the tomato itself doesn't contain the caffeine, but the leaves rather. But nonetheless, I mean, it's a molecule that is produced in a pretty common biological pathway for plants. So it actually shows up quite regularly, albeit in lesser concentrations than that of coffee Arabica or coffee Robusta.
What's in it for the plants to have caffeine? I mean, why did nature evolve this compound?
Yeah, so it's quite toxic to insects. So when you're producing the caffeine, you're basically trying to protect the plant from being eaten or invaded by critters that are going to cause damage to the plant or even kill the plant. So that's certainly true for coffee. Basically, the caffeine's contained within the seed, and the seed is what is required for the plant to propagate and continue to grow, and of course spread. And so it's protecting itself from invasion from small insects and whatnot.
Well, can you actually taste the caffeine? I mean, when I'm having my morning cup of coffee, can I taste the caffeine? If you were to take it out and make it decaf, it still doesn't seem completely coffee to me for some reason.
Right.
So that must suggest that there's something in it that I can taste.
Right, so the decaffeination process is pretty interesting. So, of course, it removes caffeine, but it also removes some other compounds and also affects the bean structure before you roast the coffee. So a decaffeinated coffee is tasting different because there's no caffeine, number one, but also because there's other compounds that were generated during the roast. But to identify basically what caffeine tastes like, after you've taken that sip of coffee and you feel that sort of drying kind of rubber band like bitterness on the tongue at the very end of as you swallow, that is basically the compound caffeine interacting with you. It's sort of a drying bitterness that you taste upon swallowing.
I've got to ask, I mean, I'm sure your friends or just acquaintances recognize you as a coffee expert. Do they ever ask you how to prepare their cup of joe in the morning? I mean, how do you do it? Do you have one of the machines like my brother has? It looks like, $10 million worth of plumbing. It's very complicated. It's certainly more complicated than his car. And I just wondered, does that make better coffee? How do you make your coffee?
Yeah, the coffee industry is pretty good at making things look really complicated and expensive, and they definitely are good at always coming out with a new product that's supposed to be better than the old one. But fundamentally, coffee brewing is adding water to ground up coffee and then waiting for a while. So I don't get fancy with it myself. I have the equivalent of a sort of an automated batch brewer where I pour water in, it boils it for me, and it drips it on top of the coffee. And at the end, I walk away and come back 5 minutes later, and I've got coffee in my pot. But of course, it can get more complicated than that. And I'll just say this, is that you can spend as much money as you want on something that brews the coffee, but the most important thing, or two most important things that you can do to improve the quality of coffee is, one, simply buy higher quality coffee, and two, spend your money on a grinder. And the grinder is the most important thing for the average coffee consumer to elevate their experience, because simply put, you need to arrive at a consistent particle size coming out of your grinder. Otherwise, you're going to have some pieces that are extracted and releasing negative compounds, while other pieces are still not fully wet. So you want to try and find grinders that produce homogeneous particle sizes, and they start to cost a little bit of money. They don't look too fancy, but they cost some money.
Chris, I think that you published a recent paper together with a volcanologist about coffee, and it's not quite clear to me how a volcanologist has anything to say about coffee. You probably had something in mind.
Right, so in 2020, I built a coffee research laboratory that was outward facing, was public, for several years now. And one day, we had the volcanology department walking by and seeing that we were grinding coffee, and it was creating a lot of static particles that were sort of spraying out across our counter. I'm sure anyone who's ever ground coffee at home can relate to this. You grind coffee and the dust sticks to everything. And it turns out that the apparatus that they use to study the dust that is ejected from a volcano when it erupts is the same apparatus that we could use to study the charging of particles coming out of the coffee grinder. In their case, they typically simulate an eruption where basically some sand is ejected into the air. The sand rubs on each other and eventually causes lightning discharges. In the volcanology department, they care about this because when a lightning bolt discharges above a volcano, it releases an electronic signature that you can monitor remotely so that you can learn something about the inside of the plume of the volcanic cloud without having to fly a helicopter or something through it, which of course is completely intractable. So we took the same technology, right, and we put it underneath a coffee grinder, and that allows us to measure the amount of charge that accumulates on the particle surface of coffee. And the key finding in that study was that all coffee charges, but if you add 1 to 3 drops of water to the whole beans before you grind them, the charging never occurs, and so as a result, you end up with coffee particles that fall out of the grinder with basically no charge at all. And the net result of that is, well, first, for the home user, It's not going to make a mess on your counter. But from the material science perspective, it means that the positive and negative charges don't stick to each other. And because they don't do that, you end up with a more even particle size. And so as a result, when you push water through that bed, you end up with more water touching more of the surface of coffee. So you extract more out of your coffee and more of the same stuff out of the coffee.
This sounds like a simple artifact of the mechanical process of grinding up the coffee, right? It's like shuffling your shoes on the carpet in the winter. You build up a static charge of electricity. Sounds to me like pretty much the same thing, although the consequences may be different.
Seth, it's exactly that. So that process where you charge up with two different materials rubbing on each other, or even the same materials, is known as triboelectrification. And indeed, our paper is called something along the lines of triboelectrification of coffee during grinding.
Chris, you've undoubtedly been present for the brewing of all sorts of cups of coffee. What is the most, if you will, complicated ritual, the most involved ritual for making coffee that you've seen?
Well, I'll start by saying that the cup of coffee that we have today is the best cup of coffee that's ever existed on Earth, and it's not going to be the best cup of coffee that will exist on Earth. So we're already doing a really good job. But every year, every month, there's a new product that will take us from a 95% to a 95.2. You get the idea. And these are very small modifications, such as the addition of a very small metal screen on top of an espresso basket by using something that looks like a hair comb to comb the coffee before you tamp it. A new way of tamping, a new way of grinding, etc. Adding water to the beans, like I've just told you that's what my research group proposed. So imagine then that somebody has created a YouTube channel, for example, that takes every single new piece of technology and puts it all together to produce one shot of espresso. There is no more of a stark contrast to the traditional Italian way, which is grind, tamp, pull a shot, and give it to someone, barely even smile, versus the one which is, let's put all of the technological advances we've put over the last, let's say, 10 years, all together into one process, one video, one Instagram reel, something like this, and shows the most convoluted, extremely complex, yielding such an incrementally improved cup as the YouTubers are today. It brings me deep happiness to watch something so simple become so complex, the same level of complexity that I tend to study myself.
Coming up, will the threat that climate change poses to coffee drive us to make synthetic brews, lab-made lattes? The promise and the limits of engineering a more sustainable cup next.
It's Coffee of the Future on Big Picture Science.
Ancestry is marking remembrance with free access to global wartime records until Wednesday. Immerse yourself in your ancestors' wartime experiences, from the home front to the front line. Explore military records, historic photos, and uncover stories of courage and resilience. Register with just your name and email at ancestry.ca to start searching. No payment needed. Honor their legacy today with Ancestry. Free access ends November 12th.
As we consider the future of coffee, we now look more closely at how the plants themselves, which need significant amounts of water and specific temperature range to grow, are threatened by climate change and disease.
Chemical engineer Chris Hendon addresses the degree to which scientists can find lab-based solutions to these challenges.
There's a growing body of scientific research that is demonstrating that coffee plants and many producing regions are under threat of crop reduction due in part to fluctuating temperature, also in part due to water scarcity. But there are a few things that we need to think carefully about. The first one is that basically there are different types of, I'd say, biological challenges for the coffee plant. The biggest one being coffee rust, which can just wipe out an entire farm. And controlling for something like a fungus, or in this case coffee rust, is really a challenging thing, and it's something it's caused farmers over the years tremendous sorrow, because you're going to lose, basically your entire crop. But the regions that are really under threat, of course, are those with water scarcity, because it's a plant and plants need water. And those are typically those in Eastern Africa. So thinking Ethiopia, Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya. And there's some very nice work that is coming out right now saying that we should expect to see those crops reduce by about 75% in 50 years. And that was one of the conservative estimates. So things are looking pretty dire for the sort of the continued access to Arabica coffee on Earth.
That sounds to me like an incentive to maybe engineer better coffee, in the sense of being able to, produce it in a wider swath of the world than just where it's traditionally been grown. I mean, is anybody trying genetic engineering on coffee?
Yeah, so World Coffee Research has produced already at least 3 hybrids, which are rust resistant and drought resistant, and produce what is viewed as favorable flavor profiles. Now, generally, if a plant is really hardy, it's not going to produce all these lovely flavors that we are used to. So if you think about how a Robusta has a lot of caffeine, it typically doesn't have the desirable acids and sweetness that we like. You can imagine growing a lot more Robusta and us learning to like it, or even making modifications to Robusta so it starts to exhibit some of those things we do like. But World Coffee Research has been working actively on this, not only on Robusta, but also on hybrids for Arabica that can do the same as Robusta and withstand much harsher conditions, but still taste pretty good. Now, I think it's quite exciting, and it's an interesting opportunity as we look forward to think about, I guess, crop sustainability in the future and how we're going to enjoy a cup of coffee in the morning.
Well, finally, Chris, given the fact that coffee in the end is just some, molecule of caffeine in there primarily, I'm not sure that that's where the taste comes from, but those are going to be molecules still. Could we sort of minimize the environmental impact of growing coffee by making synthetic coffee, made in the lab, but in industrial quantities? Or is that just going to result in war with Brazil?
Well, I hope we don't get into a war with anyone, but I'll say this, that we're not taking single raw chemicals and mixing them together. What we're still doing is taking things that are grown on Earth, but typically are waste product streams, things that we don't usually use beyond maybe the fruit itself. We're finding ways to upsell those waste products and turn them into something we like. Now, coffee is a roasted product, and when you roast basically anything, you generate cereal molecules that come from heating sugar in the presence of amino acids. So if the thing has protein in it at all, and it has some sugar or cellulose in it, when you heat it, you're going to create the Maillard reaction, and that's going to generate a bunch of flavors that are reminiscent more or less of the coffee flavor. So there's lots of different things on Earth that you could heat up, and you basically could roast them and then extract from them, and they would simulate